Hopefully, you can see that. It's the opening screen of my presentation. Can someone just say yes? No, nobody's saying yes. So then
Yes.
I take,
Yes.
oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
Ooh, I was nervous there for a second. I thought I had really messed up something. Okay, well, hopefully it's going to go a lot smoother now. All right, so if you can see that, that's the starting point for all of this. And I gave this presentation for the first time, I want to say about 5 years ago at a Colorado MUFON meeting. And the first time I gave it, I was satisfied with how it went, but I felt as though it went just a little longer than was really comfortable for some speakers. So for those of you who might have seen that one, if you're listening along and you go, gosh, something's missing, I did pull a few small things out, but I think hopefully rather than making it less, I hope it made it actually a better presentation. So I want to start by saying, as you can see, this is titled The Coming of the Saucers. This presentation is going to take the 1947 introduction flap, really. It was the first time in the United States that we had a really large flap, and the doggone thing lasted through a good part of the summer. And that's really what this presentation is about. Now, there's going to be some astute listeners who are going to say, you're missing a few really biggies. Well, I want to start by saying that I've intentionally left out two of the biggest UFO events of all time, both of which occurred in 1947. But I did this because I want you to really understand the impact of the 1947 event itself. And when you add in Roswell and others that kind of really overshadowed the scene at the time, you miss the importance of all the rest, because this truly was a time that kicked off ufology in the United States. It gave us so many cases and so much data that I want it to be basically just that. I try to have it for the spotlight with some other things. So I've intentionally left out a couple of things. And it's for the same reason that I do not go deeply into Project Sign at the end. Now, somebody's drawing pictures all over my screen. I've got, it looks like, I don't know if you folks can see it or not, but I'm seeing green lines marked all over. I hope that's not an indication that I've misspelled the title already. But anyway, so I just wanted to give that before I got going too far. All right, and now it's not advancing. Why are we not advancing here? Have I missed something? There we go.
Hey, Doug, real quickly,
Yes.
As host, can you make yourself the highlighted person?
That's a good question, because on my screen, I've got everybody turned off except the presentation.
Oh, okay.
Did that do anything?
Participants should pull it up, and then you should be able to click on it. If not, just move forward.
Yeah, also, Doug, you're not in slideshow mode.
No, I'm not, because my card, when I do that, it crashes. My video card. Well, I'm not seeming to be able to find that, Jeff. So is it too distracting? If it is, I can, well, let's see. I bet I can think through it. I'm supposed to be.
Can I say, I'm not sure that it's going to fix this, but if you move your mouse towards the very top of the screen in the center, there is a little thing, it says view options. If you click on that, you can choose a side-by-side mode. So you have your screen with your presentation, and on the right, there is yourself as the speaker and everybody else.
not sure if I've just fixed that or not.
Another option is this, on the very right corner, there is another button that says view. You can click on that and you can choose maybe side-by-side gallery or side-by-side speaker if people want to see you.
Well, I found that, but it's not doing what you're describing.
My
So-
screen's showing that Ken is the speaker. Have you
Oh,
already
that's-
discussed that?
That's what I
So-
thought was his is highlighted. I'm not
Yeah.
finding
You
how to
can also
highlight mine.
You can also click on exit full screen and it will minimize your screen, but you'll see everything else also.
Okay, well, I think that's what I just did. Did that improve anything for folks, or should I just,
Or yeah, another option is to unpen Ken.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave here and see what happens.
I don't know how to unpin Ken. Ken probably wishes I would unpin myself sometimes.
About that. No,
You did it.
no, that was me. I unpinned
Oh.
myself, I think.
Okay,
Is
hang
that
on.
correct?
There. Now I've pinned Rich. There we go. All right, well, I think I'm pinned now. I feel like I should be going steady with everyone at this point. Of course, that's something that they don't do anymore, I guess. So anyway, now that I'm pinned, let's see if I can figure out how to get back to my program now. Okay. Whoops. And now can everyone see my presentation screen again? Or can anyone see my presentation
Yes, we can
screen?
see it. We
Yes,
see it
yes,
in the,
yes,
the
yes.
slideshow mode, but we see it.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let's see if we can carry on here. I always like to start with one of these little multi-image screens and talk just a little bit about what was it like at the time that we're speaking about here. We're talking about 1947. And if we take a little bit of a look at 1947 in the US at that time, Harry Truman was the president, and this was the year he launched the Truman Doctrine. It was a foreign policy whose stated purpose was to counter Soviet geopolitical expansion. It also introduced in 1947 was the Marshall Plan, an American initiative to aid Western Europe with over $12 billion in economic assistance to help rebuild Western Europe, the Western European economies left devastated by the war. So the US was really, we were reaching everywhere we could across the globe. We were trying to make things better here in the US as well as back in Europe. And it was a time of a lot of new things socially. The CIA was formed in September of 47, and the US Air Force officially became a separate branch from the Army that same year. February 21st, and I've just got a list here, so yes, I'm cheating a little bit. On February 21st, the Polaroid land camera, the first instant camera, was introduced. And then in November, Howard Hughes finally flew the Spruce Goose, the largest aircraft ever built. The classic film Miracle on 34th Street was released in June. And also in 1947, the transistor was invented. So there was a lot going on. And probably, in my mind, one of the most exciting things in 1947, other than UFOs, was that on October 14th, Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in the Bell X-1 rocket plane named Glamorous Glennis. And something to remember when we're going through this presentation is that Chuck Yeager was flying at 891 miles per hour. Okay, so he was just a little over, not actually, I think is almost 100 miles per hour over the speed of sound at that point. So that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind as we go through this. The US public was not accustomed to hearing about things going that fast. And here, for the first time, we broke the sound barrier, but there was so much going on in the news about these unknown objects that were apparently going at a much greater speed even than Chuck Yeager had been able to do. Let's see. I have to remember that I have to go over here in this mode to advance the slideshow. Here's a couple of other things about the US at that time. Reynolds Wrap was introduced in 1947, as was the Frisbee. Snowballs, which continue to this day to be one of my favorite snack foods, was introduced in 1947. Nabisco introduced their wheat thins, and for the ladies in the group, Prel shampoo. And I don't know if anybody even uses Prel anymore. When I was growing up, it seemed like that was the big deal, was Prel shampoo. And for those of us who are young at heart, Bazooka bubblegum made its debut in 1947. But of course, as this slide indicates, there's a lot else going on in the world as well. The Cold War was just ramping up, and everybody had the atomic bomb very much on our minds. It was a time of a lot of growth. It was a time of opportunity, but it was also in the backs of everyone's mind was the knowledge that there was a Cold War ramping up. We didn't realize how much that was going to grow or how long it was going to last, but we certainly knew that something very large was looming on the horizon, and we knew that the atomic bomb was a very real possibility, and it was in everyone's minds. Now, of course, we had had UFO situations well before 1947. Probably one of the biggest to hit the national consciousness was the Battle of Los Angeles. And we've all known about that. We've studied the Battle of Los Angeles. We've even had a couple of different presentations about it here at Colorado MUFON. But, you know, to think that UFOs started in 1947, while that would be, you know, of course, ridiculous, it did turn out to be the biggest watershed for UFOs that we had seen. I think I had a thought there, but it slipped, so we're just going to go ahead and move on. It happens when you get to a certain age. You just start to have these slippages, so to speak. So the first reported U.S. sighting of unidentified flying objects in 1947 occurred in April at Richmond, Virginia, when at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, meteorologist Mazinski saw a silvery disk through a theodolite while tracking a pieball weather balloon. The object traveled east to west at less than 15,000 feet and appeared larger than the balloon itself. Now, previous to all of this kicking off, the NICAP database lists only 22 sightings reported for the whole year of 1946. And in fact, NICAP lists only 4 sightings reported in the US prior to the month of June in 1947. So it definitely, there's definitely a lot of information that suddenly popped up. The second reported incident of 1947 was on May 5th near Seattle, Washington at 3:30 p.m. when a silver object was spotted streaking across the sky by 3 witnesses. The object was thought to have nosedived, and all of the witnesses thought that the object was most certainly going to crash. Before it seemed to hit the ground, the object disintegrated, leaving a long pillar of gas hanging in the sky. It's important to know that most of these sightings were in the press at the time. These were not things that just we learned about 20 or 30 years later, as we did with Roswell. Most of these cases were in the daily newspaper, at least in the local area. But as 1947 progressed, these sightings reports were listed nationwide in all of the major newspapers. Well, the third sighting that happened in 47 was on May 17th. And so you can see there's some considerable gap between these incidents. And on May 17th in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, at 9 p.m., field engineer Savage saw a frosty, white, round, and flat object with a diameter to thickness ratio of 10:1. The object was the size of a B-29 and was traveling north at 350 degrees heading at an estimated altitude of 18,000 feet and traveling 3 times the speed of a jet. The fourth reported UFO sighting in 47 occurred the last week of May near Beaufort, South Carolina at 11 a.m. when a physician noticed a formation of 4 silvery disc-like objects flying overhead in a southeasterly direction at a terrific rate of speed. The discs appeared to be spinning on their axes and were at the estimated altitude of about 20,000 feet. Now, I know there's a lot of MUFON investigators listening to this presentation, and I know that there are some folks who may not be MUFON investigators, but who are very well versed in ufology. And I'm betting that many of you are noticing that as I read some of these statements, these are actually coming out of the newspapers at the time. I've been very fortunate in being able to research, and I don't mind name dropping once in a while. David Marler has an amazing collection of old newspapers, and he's very generous with his collection and his time. And he made it possible for me to actually lift right out of those newspaper articles of the time some of these statements. So I think that's pretty cool. Well, as this current slide shows, that after so few sightings in the first 5 months of 1947, the month of June of 1947 came in kind of like a dam bursting. And just like most floods start out as a trickle, we had that trickle earlier in the month, in the year. Oh my. If everyone could just think to mute their microphones, that would be greatly appreciated. So we had the trickle for the first few months, but then in June, it was one of those situations where we went from uh-oh to oh my gosh, here they come. And we really did start to get a lot more activity going. And at that time, as the map here shows, after so few sightings in the first 5 months, the month of June came kind of like a dam bursting. June 1st through 15th, there were 9 sightings, more than double the number that we had seen previously in this year. And this was approximately 1 sighting every 36 hours. I like to, in this presentation, because there is so much material, I like to try to do a running tabulation of how often these cases were coming. It really does help to give us more of an idea of just how frequent these sightings were coming in together. So at this point, they were having about 1 sighting every day and a half, and it increased in just 15 days of 47% more than what we had had in the previous month. And as that dam burst suggests, that's quite a trickle. One of these sightings occurred on June 14th near Bakersfield, California. At 2:15 p.m., veteran pilot Richard Rankin and a young boy saw 10 almost round or flapjack-shaped objects in formation at 9,000 feet and
Doug, you froze.
I hear you.
From June 16th to the 20th, just 5 more days, there were 9 more sightings, or about 1 sighting every 12 hours. This was now 2 sightings per day for a 300% increase over the previous 15 days. On June 19th in Webster, Massachusetts, one of the earliest cases of humanoid reports, an older, unidentified woman observed a low-flying object with an occupant inside who, in her words, looked like a Navy officer. And some of these old newspaper accounts are really a lot of fun to read because people didn't know what to call these UFOs and their occupants at the time, you can really get a feel for just how people were kind of thinking about this new phenomenon. From June 21st to the 23rd, there were 11 sightings, or about one sighting every 6.5 hours. This came to an average of 3.5 sightings per day for a 200% increase over the previous 5 days. On June 21st, near Spokane, Washington, at 11:50 a.m., a civilian woman, Mrs. Overman, saw 8 shiny, silvery, and slim-bodied, disc-shaped objects the size of a house flying at an estimated 600 miles per hour, traveling south-southwest at 7,000 feet altitude. These maps, I realize they kind of get to where they all look the same, but I do feel that it's kind of interesting for you to be able to see all of these different places on the maps where these sightings were coming in from. Now, June 24th, there were 19 sightings on this one day, or about one sighting every hour and 15 minutes. This was a 500% increase over the 3 previous days. The best known of the early cases occurred on this day, frequently credited as being the first or the one that started it all. But of course, it was neither. What it was is the most publicized and best documented case to date, with a very credible witness. It can also be said to have given us our first iconic representation of the phenomenon, the term flying saucer. And of course, this case was the Kenneth Arnold sighting. Would have been crazy of me to have left Kenneth Arnold out of all of this. Now, let's see. Nope, I just about made a mistake there with my notes. It was Kenneth Arnold who really, as I said, made the big splash. But what it was about the Kenneth Arnold sighting that made it so different from those that went before and from many that came after was the man himself, the witness. The circumstances were certainly unique at the time, and the details were just unbelievable. There was so much detail that he was able to give us. And I'll start with the circumstances because the details kind of flow out from there. It was a perfectly clear day, and Arnold was flying at a little over 9,000 feet. He had the anomalies under observation for approximately 10 minutes, which, as you all know, is a very lengthy sighting for UFOs. And this allowed him sufficient time to make out details of the structured craft. Being above them, knowing his own altitude, and having the known height of the mountains gave a finite distance against which he could judge their size. And he had the fixed points of reference against which to time the speed of the UFOs. And so the circumstances simply could not have been better. I think I needed to advance a slide there that I might have forgotten. Hopefully it's not going to change things too much. So those are the circumstances. The man himself is about as unique to the situation as the circumstances were. What made him so well thought of and what made him such an astute observer? Well, Kenneth Arnold was a man of many accomplishments. He took his first flying lesson at 16, and had logged more than 4,000 hours flying in mountainous country. He was a flying, traveling salesman of firefighting equipment. He was a field representative for the American Red Cross Life-Saving Service. He was an active member of the Idaho Search and Rescue Mercy Flights. He was a deputy sheriff for the Ada County, Idaho Sheriff's Aerial Posse. And he was a relief deputy federal United States Marshal that was often called on to fly federal prisoners up to McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary. Kenneth Arnold was a man of high and well-deserved reputation, and his many hours of flying made him an astute observer. I'm going to take this moment to ask that folks please mute your microphones. I'm not sure what the situation really is there, but it's starting to almost get to the point where I'm wondering if folks can hear me. I'm hoping you can, but getting some rather odd feedback. Okay, so Tuesday, June 24th, 1947 was a crystal clear blue sky day, and Kenneth Arnold was preparing to take off on a flight from Chehalis to Yakima. Arnold had decided to spend some time searching the high plateau of Mount Rainier for the wreckage of a C-46 Marine transport that had reportedly gone down in that area just a few weeks prior. There was a reward out for anyone who could help find that Marine transport, but it's not clear if Arnold was aware of that at the time or not. He never really mentioned it, and knowing Arnold's reputation, he probably would have been searching for it either way. Well, Arnold took off from Chehalis, Washington Airport at approximately 2 p.m. and headed for the high plateau of Mount Rainier, which was an elevation varying from 9 to over 10,000 feet. At about 2:55 p.m., Arnold settled in over Mineral, Washington at an altitude of approximately 9,200 feet. As he entered into a 180-degree turn, a bright flash suddenly lit up the surface of his aircraft. Fearing he had missed noticing the approach of another aircraft, Arnold spent the next 20 to 30 seconds urgently searching the sky all around in an attempt to determine where the flash of light had come from. Initially, he could only see a DC-4 that was far off to the left and to the south, which was to the rear of his position. And he felt sure that between the position of that aircraft and the sun, that was not where the flash had come from. So he continued searching the sky, and suddenly the flash happened again, and this time Arnold caught the direction from which it had come. Far to the left and north of his position, Arnold saw a formation of very bright objects approaching from the vicinity of Mount Baker. At a distance of about 100 miles, the objects were too small to detect any detail at first, or to even get an accurate count, but Arnold could tell even then that they were flying at a tremendous speed, and he assumed they were a flight of jets. His curiosity piqued, Arnold watched as they approached. Now, at that time, jets were an anomaly. Folks knew that they existed, but even Arnold hadn't seen many. And so to see a flight of jets, possibly going at full speed, was something that Arnold was not likely to just let go. Curiosity was, and so he watched as they approached. But then he could see they were on a heading of approximately 170 degrees and that they would pass directly in front of him. As they neared his position almost at right angles to Arnold, he could see the objects were flying very close to the mountaintops, traveling from north to south. He was able to count, ooh, that didn't sound healthy. I hope nobody got hurt. He was able to count 9 objects flying diagonally in a reverse echelon formation with a larger gap between the first 4 and the last 5 objects. He could see the objects' outlines plainly as they flipped and flashed along against the white snow and the blue sky. Still thinking he must be observing a flight of jets, he was surprised at not seeing any tails on the craft. Realizing he was in an excellent position to clock their speed, he determined to try. The giant bulks of Mount Rainier and Mount Adams offered a perfect point of reference. As the first craft in the formation passed the snow-based cleft of Mount Rainier, the second hand on Arnold's clock was approaching the top of the dial and offered him a perfect opportunity to start counting. The time was within a few seconds of 1 minute to 3. And again, I think I missed advancing my slide here. As the last of this group of objects sped past the southernmost crest of Mount Adams, Arnold again glanced at the sweeping second hand of his instrument clock. As closely as he could determine, the formation of aircraft had covered the distance between Mount Rainier to the north and Mount Adams to the south in 1 minute and 42 seconds. Using the known locations of the peaks of the Cascade Mountains as one point of reference, Arnold quickly determined his own position as a second point of reference. And by doing so, he was able to get a very close approximation of the distance between himself and the flight of objects. Using these figures, and more gathered later when he could fly the route he had observed the objects take, Arnold was able to get a good estimate of the size of the objects and allowed him to determine the formation was about 5 miles long. Well, as you can imagine, Arnold was fascinated by this flight of craft. Whoops, no, it's all right. Advancing at one more will catch us up maybe. They didn't fly like any aircraft he'd ever seen before. Their echelon formation was backward from that practiced by the Air Force, as the first craft was at a greater altitude than those behind it, and all craft followed at an altitude slightly lower than the one before them. They maintained a definite formation, but there was an odd irregularity to their motion. Arnold described this as being like the motion of a speedboat on rough water, or, and some said this is where the term flying saucer came from, they flew like a saucer would if you skipped it across the water. In addition to this vertical bobbing motion, each craft continually rocked side to side, alternately tipping its wings. It was a side-to-side motion that resulted in the periodic blue-white flashes as the sun reflected off the highly polished surfaces of these craft. And while, and while holding to their north to south course, the craft swerved in and out between the high mountain peaks of the Cascade Mountains between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. I think we can, there we are. Oops. Still thinking this must be a flight of some kind of new jet, Arnold was eager to get to Yakima and tell some of his friends at the airport there what he had seen. Pilots and others who work at airports love to talk about airplanes and aeronautics, and this was as true in 1947 as it is today, possibly even more so. But in 1947, there was a lot more conjecture and anticipation about new aircraft than there is today. By the end of the war, Germany had great success in experimenting with both jet and rocket power. And since the end of the war, the US had showed great determination in advancing our own forms of propulsion. On June 19th, just 5 days earlier, United States Army Air Force Colonel Albert Boyd had set a new official world airspeed record of 623.62 miles per hour in a Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. As he had headed for Yakima, Kenneth Arnold hadn't done more than rough estimates on time and distance, but he felt sure that this formation of strange craft had been traveling in excess of 1,000 miles per hour. At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Kenneth Arnold landed at Yakima and relayed his experience to Mr. Al Baxter, general manager of Central Aircraft, and several other pilots. No one seemed to doubt the story, even at Arnold's enthusiasm, but they all wondered whether or not it could have just been a flight of guided missiles from Moses Lake. And I think it's time to, there we go. Somewhat deflated, Arnold got back in his Cal Air and took off for Pendleton, Oregon. During the flight, he made some rough calculations based on the numbers he had gathered during his sighting. He didn't feel that he had seen a flight of rockets, but at the same time, the speeds that they had been traveling at seemed outrageous enough that he couldn't help but give some credence, at least, to this idea. Later, he was known to have said that he really would have preferred that what he had seen was a flight of some new type of jet aircraft. The idea of having seen a flight of missiles was somehow more disturbing to him even than the idea of having seen a UFO, which of course at that time he wasn't even thinking. But when he landed at the large airfield at Pendleton, he found quite a group of people there who were ready to greet him. The basic story had arrived ahead of him and everyone was eager to hear all the details. Excuse me. Arnold retold his story and added the figures he had come up with during his flight from Yakima to Pendleton, but he stated that he couldn't be sure he hadn't made a mistake as the numbers still seemed too high and he had been partially distracted by piloting his plane. Arnold and several others went through the math again and everyone kept coming up with figures in excess of 1,700 miles per hour. Someone even tried using the distance between the bases of Mount Adams and Mount Rainier, which would be far shorter than what Arnold was certain the objects had flown. And yet the figure was still over 1,350 miles per hour. At that point, Arnold was sure they had to have been guided missiles. Now, among those in the crowd, I think I've got a picture here to go with that. Among those in the crowd were several newspapermen. When describing the motion of the objects, one analogy Kenneth Arnold had used was that they flew the way a saucer would if it slipped across water. One of the newspapermen are alleged to have translated this into flying saucers. And here in this newspaper article, I don't think this one came from David Marler's collection. His are usually the newspaper themselves, and they come out much clearer. I'm still trying to find a copy of that one, but here's the original mention of flying saucers. Now, on June 24th, the day that Arnold had saw his formation of 9 discs, there was a sharp increase in the number of UFO sightings from 6 on the previous day to 20 on the 24th. All but 2 of these occurred in the Pacific Northwest. Half were of multiple objects, and one may have been a ground confirmation of Arnold's own sighting. Even Lieutenant Governor of Idaho reported a sighting that day, and a few other sightings that occurred on this day, the 24th, are a little after noon, a man driving down a remote rural road near Pendleton, Oregon, became aware of a loud humming sound. Cresting a rise in the road, he saw in a field to his left a large disc-shaped object hovering about 6 feet off the ground. Beneath the disc were 2 short figures wearing green suits and white helmets. The figures suddenly vanished, and the craft instantly shot towards the Columbia River, making a wide circle when they flew back towards the mountains. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this wouldn't have been the first sighting of humanoids related to UFOs, but it certainly is one of the earlier ones. At 1:50 p.m., Charles Castle, age 60, was walking along a highway about 12 miles. Okay, can we please mute the microphones?
Hey, hold on a second, Doug. Prudy Parsons. Prudy Parsons, can you please mute your microphone? We're hearing every sound from your area. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Jeff. So anyway, getting back to Charles Castle, he was walking along the highway about 12 miles east of Joliet, Illinois, when he spotted 9 speeding discs in the air. He described them as a string of flat circular objects at extreme speeds. Castle said he could see no connecting link between them, but they acted as though the leading disc was somehow controlling the others, because when it flipped, the others flipped, and when it would right itself, the others would right themselves as well. They appeared to be at a high altitude and traveling north to south. Then at 2:30 p.m. near Richland, Washington, L.G. Brenner observed 3 flat objects that were flying faster than a P-38. The object's trajectory was on a level course to the northwest. It's always interesting when these newspaper articles reference known aircraft of the time. It really helps to solidify, at least in my mind, how knowledgeable the public was about our aircraft. At about 3 p.m., a member of the Washington State Forest Service was on fire watch at the Lookout Tower in Diamond Gap, a small settlement near the town of Salmon, Washington, just south of Mount Rainier. He noticed what he described as flashes in the distance, quite high up in the east. He said that they seemed to be going in a straight line, and he thought he could hear a noise higher pitched than an airplane. That is the one, incidentally, that has been thought to have possibly been a ground confirmation of Kenneth Arnold's observation. Just about the time that Kenneth Arnold had his sighting, Fred Johnson, a prospector, was on Mount Adams when he observed 5 or 6 disc-shaped craft flying over the Cascade Mountains. He said they were round with a slight tail and about 30 feet in diameter. They were not flying any sort of formation, and as they banked in a turn, the sunlight flashed off of them. As they approached, Johnson noticed that his compass began to spin wildly. When the objects finally vanished into the distance, the compass returned to normal. These images that you see on your screen, these are representative of the objects reported during the summer of 1947. And as can be seen here, many were strikingly similar. At the top left is the object seen by Mrs. Elvira Forsyth of Seattle, Washington. Top right and at the bottom are from the July 7th Phoenix, Arizona photograph taken by William Rhodes. This has become one of the more famous images. And if I'm not mistaken, those photographs were studied by the Condon Committee in Colorado in 1968. And of course, the two different objects seen by Kenneth Arnold are shown here as well. I always thought it was interesting that most of the time, when you read about Kenneth Arnold's sighting, you don't really get the impression that there were two different types of objects seen. And initially, he intentionally left that point out. And later he said that it was because he wanted to make sure that he had something that he knew about his own sighting, so that when other people started trying to be hangers on, as he put it, he would have the ability to know who really knew the stuff and who were making things up. Because if they knew the facts, or if they had seen something similar, then he figured that they would have seen two different types of aircraft. Well, between June 25th and 26th, 20 new sightings were reported, or about one sighting every 2.5 hours. These sightings were spread fairly evenly across the country. So we're really picking up speed here. And there have been some suggestions, at least, that it was in part due to Kenneth Arnold's sighting that we had so many suddenly seem to be showing up all across the country in such rapid succession. Well, June 27th and 28th had 32 sightings, or about one every hour and a half. This average was still less than the average for June 24th. On June 27th, at Woodland, Washington, two groups of loosely bunched objects were observed rocking back and forth as they flew silently overhead. The report was phoned into the Portland, Oregon Journal at the same late that same afternoon by witness Clyde Homan. On June 28th, approximately 30 miles northwest of Lake Mead, Nevada, at 3:15 p.m., Army Air Force pilot Lieutenant E.B. Armstrong from Brooke Army Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas, was flying an F-51 fighter at 6,000 feet when he saw a tight formation of 5 to 6 white circular 3-foot objects off his right wing, headed east-southeast at 6,000 feet altitude and doing at least 285 miles per hour. Now, you'll note that I am saying Army Air Force because the Air Force wouldn't become the Air Force for about another month. So a lot of these old newspaper articles definitely pin it down very nicely to what month these sightings were in. June 29th and 30th had 25 sightings, or about one sighting every 2 hours. This brought the total for the month of June to 128. June 29th, about 20 miles east-northeast of Las Cruces, New Mexico, at about 1:15 p.m., rocket scientist engineer Dr. Carl Zahn of the Rocket Sonde section at White Sands and another scientist, Curtis C. Rockwood, and his wife, and a White Sands technician, John R. Coop, were driving in a car from Las Cruces to White Sands Proving Grounds, headed northeast when they saw to their right, or the east, a rotating silvery or shiny disc or sphere with no appendages, wings, tail, or propellers. It was reflecting sunlight as it crossed the sky at a high speed heading and about 8,000 feet altitude when it suddenly disappeared in midair in clear cloudless sky. They had observed it for nearly 60 seconds. Now, it was exciting stuff, I'm sure, to read in the paper where these rocket scientists were actually seeing this sort of thing. Now, it's the sort of information that later, after we had several other incidents, that we wouldn't have gotten that kind of information. Well, July started off, and July 1st and 2nd set a record with 47 sightings in just 2 days. This is just less than a sighting every hour. July 2nd had 7 sightings in the Los Angeles area. July 2nd near Roswell, New Mexico at 9:50 p.m., pharmacist Dan Wilmot, his wife and son Paul, were at home in downtown Roswell when they observed a fireball come from southeast directly or almost directly overhead, heading towards and disappearing over 6 Mile Mountain at an azimuth of about 306 degrees. And there have been many folks who have connected this to the Roswell crash, believing that this might have been the sighting of the Roswell craft before, of course, the incident would have occurred. There we go. July 3rd set a new record high with 27 sightings in a single day. The new average now was 1 sighting every 53 minutes. During the 5 weeks from June 1st through July 3rd, sightings had been made in at least 36 states and 3 Canadian provinces. Yet a UP story from Chicago, datelined July 3rd, headlined a rundown of reports with the headline "Flying Saucer Seen Over 8 States." So I think whoever wrote that article must have missed something there. An AP account from Washington on the same date was a little closer to the truth. It reported that sightings had been made in 10 states. With the increase in sightings from July 1st through July 3rd came the expected increase in additional comment and official statements. July 3rd, South Brooksville, Harborside, Maine, at 2:30 p.m., astronomer John Cole heard a roaring noise overhead and observed about 10 very light-colored 50 to 100 foot wide objects to the north at about 50-degree elevation, flying in formation and moving like a swarm of bees to the northwest at about 1,200 miles per hour. The formation moved through about 30 degrees of arc at about 20 miles distance. The sighting lasted 10 to 15 seconds. You know, the good news about all of this exciting stuff happening when it did is that when Project Sign finally did get going, these were the cases that they looked at in their first attempts at making a recommendation to the Air Force. Well, there were 88 specific sightings listed for July 4th, 1947, coming from an area comprising 24 states and 1 Canadian province. Well over 400 people from all walks of life witnessed the phenomenon. Approximately 2/3 of these observations took place during the daylight hours, or dusk, describing disc-shaped, round, or oval objects. Among the many night reports were several accounts of fireballs. Nearly half of the sightings described multiple objects, with some groups flying in V formations. Most of the sightings were very brief, describing objects flying in a straight course at tremendous speeds. But there were many reports of longer duration, as well as a number of sightings of slow-moving or hovering objects. Of the 88 sightings on July 4th, 19 were in the Portland area. And it's important to note that at that time in our history, fireworks were not as readily available as they are now. And of course, anyone who investigates UFOs over the July 4th.
Is he? How much is this? 20.
Okay. Ask my dad.
Hey,
Order me a Coke.
there's somebody that says iPhone. Can you mute your microphone? Yeah, can you mute your microphone, please?
There we go. So on July 4th, Independence Day, official statements were released from Wright Field, acknowledging the reports were being received and examined there. In a dispatch from Chicago, Major Paul Gaynor was quoted as saying that a preliminary investigation of reports had been dropped because of a lack of concrete evidence. And a Washington spokesman was quoted as saying, "The Air Force people are inclined to believe either that the observers just imagined they saw something or that there is some meteorological explanation for the phenomenon." Well, that was two statements on July 4th. But among the meteorological possibilities was a fanciful one involving icing conditions in high clouds that can produce large hailstones, which might have flattened out and glided a bit. The Washington spokesman added that a preliminary study of the reports has not produced enough fact to warrant further investigation. So, as we can see, even at this early date, we were getting some pretty interesting statements out of the government. But conversely, a report from Wright Field on the same day stated that officers of the Army Air Force Air Materiel Command at Wright Field were asked by General Carl Spaatz, the Army's air commander, to check on the reports and try to ascertain what the discs are. Lieutenant William C. Anderson, public relations officer at the field, said, "So far, we haven't found anything to confirm that the discs exist. We don't think they're guided missiles. As things stand right now, it appears to be either a phenomenon or a figment of someone's imagination." According to these spokesmen, the investigation at Wright Field was continuing in spite of what spokesmen in Washington were telling the press. These contradictory official statements established the ground rules and set the tone that would characterize the Air Force's handling of the subject for the next 20 years, demonstrating clearly that its primary concern was not one of scientific investigation, but rather one of public relations. Within 24 hours after the release of these official statements, events would begin to take place that would leave everybody, civilians and military personnel alike, scrambling for answers. Well, if June 24 had been a dam bursting, July 4th was an atomic blast. On July 4th, 1947, there were 88 sightings reported for this single day, more than the first 26 days of June combined. The new average was set at one sighting every 16 and a half minutes. Reports of sightings coming almost simultaneously from hundreds of bewildered citizens were made to newspapers and police stations all over the country, from Southern California to New Brunswick, and from Louisiana to North Dakota. People everywhere were experiencing the beginning of one of the most massive waves of UFO sightings on record. Reports came from all kinds of observers, from picnickers and holiday crowds to policemen and public officials, and from pilots, farmers, professional men, housewives, and bus drivers, all on one day. On July 5th, excuse me, I have to. On July 5th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold landed his little Cal Air at Boeing Field to gas up. While there, he heard the amazing news that a photograph had been taken of one of these flying saucers the night before. There was also the story about the sighting of several discs by a United Airlines crew. But it was the photograph taken by one Frank Raymond, a Coast Guard yeoman, that sparked Arnold's interests. Rushing uptown to the Seattle office of the International News Service, Arnold was determined to see the blown-up print of the flying saucer for himself. As it happened, Captain E.J. Smith and his co-pilot, Ralph Stevens, part of the crew that had seen the discs the night before, also happened to be there inquiring about the photo. One of the reporters took a photograph of Kenneth Arnold, Captain Emil J. Smith, and Ralph Stevens looking at the photo taken by Frank Raymond. And that's the image that we see here. This is the photograph taken by Frank Raymond, a Coast Guard yeoman, at 5:45 p.m. on July 4th, 1947. Raymond stated that the object was moving across the wind, and after viewing the photo, Smith and Stevens told Arnold about their sighting of the night before. And I think I've got behind again. Here we go. At 9:04 p.m., United Airlines Flight 105 took off from Boise Municipal Airport en route to Seattle, Washington. The aircraft was a DC-3 mainliner transporter, and at the controls were Captain E.J. Smith and First Officer Ralph Stevens. About 8 minutes after takeoff, at an altitude of 7,100 feet, flying northwest on a heading of 300 degrees, co-pilot Ralph Stevens drew Captain Smith's attention to 5 flat, circular-shaped objects flying in loose formation to the left of the DC-3 on a heading of about 290 degrees over Emmett, Idaho. After a few moments, Captain Smith called stewardess Marty Morrow to the cockpit. They did not tell her what they were seeing, but asked her to look and tell them if she saw anything unusual. Upon looking through the window of the cockpit, she later stated, "I exclaimed, 'Why, there's a formation of those flying discs.'" As the crew continued to watch, the 5 objects appeared to open and close in formation, then veered off to the left of the transport. Captain Smith called the Ontario, Oregon CAA radio communication station and asked if they could see anything in the area of the DC-3, and the response was negative. While Captain Smith was talking to the tower, First Officer Stevens informed him that the objects had passed out of sight to the west. A moment later, 4 more similar objects approached the DC-3. 3 flew together and the 4th somewhat further away and at a higher altitude. By this time, the transport had reached 8,000 feet altitude and was approaching the Blue Mountains near Pendleton, Oregon. These 4 objects stayed slightly above the DC-3, and the 3 objects that were flying together seemed to merge, to disappear and then come back into sight. All 4 accelerated into a climb and then vanished to the west. The crew was positive that the 9 objects were neither fireworks, reflections, smoke, nor any other aircraft they were familiar with. The crew had no points of reference, so they could not estimate speeds of the objects, but they did get a good enough look at the objects to be certain they were circular, flat on the bottom, rough on top, and were larger than the DC-3 transport. The sighting lasted about 12 minutes. July 5th, the day Arnold met Captain E.J. Smith, had 77 sightings reported, or 1 every 18 and a half minutes. Several locations had multiple sightings. July 5th, Seattle, Washington, at 12:40 p.m., Sergeant Rainer Kane, USMC, reported 2 objects like footballs. One banked slightly at about 8,000 feet, then shot up and out of sight to the north. The second one, seen about a minute later, was wobbling and headed north, climbing slowly out of sight. Of the 77 sightings on July 5th, 9 sightings occurred in the Bay Area of Washington and Oregon. The map we see here. There were 157 sightings on July 6th, more than the entire month of June. The new high average was approximately a sighting every 9 minutes and 20 seconds. By this point, new high numbers of sightings had become commonplace. But if the numbers weren't exciting anyone, the sightings certainly were. There we go. Of the 157 sightings on July 6th, there were 15 sightings in the Birmingham area, 13 in the Bay Area, and 7 in the St. Louis, Missouri area. Well, July 7 broke the previous day's record with 160 sightings. The new average was 1 sighting every 9 minutes. And by this point in 1947, every state in the continental US except West Virginia and Georgia had had at least 1 reported sighting. July 7th, Muroc Army Airfield, California, at 10:10 a.m., Army Air Force experimental test pilot Major Joel C. Wise was powering up an XP-84 jet on the runway when he looked up where others were looking and saw to the north a yellowish white sphere about 5 to 10 feet in diameter oscillating in a forward whirling motion without losing altitude. It was at about 10,000 feet, moving west to east at about 200 to 225 miles per hour. Well, of the 160 sightings on July 7, 19 sightings occurred in the Seattle-Tacoma area, and 12 sightings were in the Chicago area. Bring us up to speed here on our slides.
Hey, Becky, real quickly. Becky, I think you've lost the mute on your phone.
There we go. Well, July 8th saw slightly fewer reported sightings, with only 90 sightings in a 24-hour period. The average was back down to one sighting on average for every 16 minutes. And Roswell, of course, was counted in on this day. July 8th, Muroc Army Airfield, California, at about 12 noon, Army Air Force experimental test pilot Captain John Paul Strapp, Mr. Lenz from Wright Field, and two others in an observation truck at Area 3 of Rogers Dry Lake for a P-82 ejection seat test, saw a round silver or aluminum white object, at first thought to be a parachute, about 25 feet wide, falling from a height below 20,000 feet of the test aircraft. The object drifted horizontally toward Mount Wilson to the south at less than 50 miles per hour, which, when close to the horizon, appeared to have an oval outline with two thick fins or knobs on the upper surface that seemed to rotate or oscillate. The object slowly disappeared below the mountaintop into the distance after about 90 seconds of observation. Then on July 9th, 1947, at about 12:17 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, Dave Johnson, the aviation editor for the Idaho Statesman and a former B-29 pilot, was flying a National Guard AT-6 airplane at 14,000 feet over Anderson Dam, a few miles east of Boise, Idaho, when he observed a black disc-shaped object which stood out against the clouds. Johnson watched the disc for more than 10 seconds and tried to photograph it. He said the object made a half roll and then a stair-step climb and vanished into the clouds. That observer, by the way, would play a very large role in the Kenneth Arnold story. If you've ever read Kenneth Arnold's book, it's that observer was one of his close friends after the sighting. Well, the totals for July 9th and 10th slipped even farther to 42 sightings in 48 hours. The average for these 2 days was a sighting every 68.5 minutes. July 11th through the 15th had 19 sightings, or about 3.5 sightings per day. July 12th, Sandpoint Naval Air Station, Washington, at 6:35 p.m., Seaman John C. Kennedy and Seaman Ben Bobberly reported a disc-like object observed flying overhead, heading east toward Kirkland Air Force Base, Army Air Force Base, over Lake Washington. The object was silvery, perfectly round, and made no noise. Kenneth Arnold, Captain Emil Smith, and Dave Johnson were each asked to send a detailed description of what they had seen to the commanding officer of Wright-Patterson Field, Dayton, Ohio, and were subsequently interviewed on July 12th through the 14th by two representatives
Looks like you froze there, Doug.
Am I back, Jeff?
Yeah, I think you just jumped back in here.
Okay.
Let me,
Not sure what happened there. Let's,
I think you're still the host.
okay. Can you see the presentation slide?
No, no, we're on
No.
multi-screen.
Okay. Okay, well, let me see if I can fix that. I'm not sure what happened, but
Well, you know what? It's
try
2:20.
again.
It's 2:26. You want to take 5 minutes here?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's take 5 minutes, and when everybody comes back, we'll try to resume this situation.
Okay.
Actually, I think did the screen come back up?
Yes, it did.
Okay, all right. I'm not going to touch anything. We'll take 5 minutes, and hopefully when we come back, everything's going to be the way it's supposed to be.
Okay, that sounds good. And there's in the beginning, I'm just going to talk here for a couple of minutes. But in the beginning, I was talking about the Co-MUFON YouTube channel and that the interview, the Kurt Jumongi interview with Kevin Newt. There's one thing that Kevin talks about that kind of all interrelates with each other, and it has to do with spinning compasses. Why can't you take a clear photo of a UFO? And how did they shut down all the nuclear missile installations? Well, if you watch that video, he presents a very interesting theory that the second he said it, it all made sense to me. So anyway, I just wanted to plug the Co-MUFON YouTube channel there.
Sounds like a great program. I'm going to have to try to catch that one.
And it's from a different perspective that that I've seen, and I watch a lot of UFO stuff. So, and Kurt actually has a interview coming up with Luis from ATIP, and it'll be interesting to see his approach on the interview, because of course Luis has been interviewed by everybody. So it'll be interesting. The way he approaches an interview is just I really enjoy. I'd put music on now, but I don't know how to do that. So.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing Katie knows how to do.
Yeah. I can edit video. It's just this whole Zoom thing is new to me.
Well, I think it changes somewhat. It's not quite the same as it was when I started using Zoom about maybe almost 2 years now.
Yeah, well, it's changed in the last 60 days.
Yeah.
One of the things is you can change the printout of your name, which you couldn't do that before. And there's just other little subtle differences.
Well, I'm lucky if I can get my name replaced with a bad photo. So I'm not going to try changing how it's printed.
Well, Katie owns the account for this Zoom. So if I put myself on hold or stop the video, it's Katie's picture that pops up. So.
Well, she knows how to publicize.
Yeah, she's doing a good job of it. Yeah. And for those of you that don't know, Katie actually wrote a book, and it's a very good book. If you want more information on that, just let me know.
Yes, it is a good book.
Yeah.
And I think she's got a second coming out before too much longer, doesn't she?
I've heard, but I don't know the details of it.
Yeah.
I've got her book. I've got Barry Roth books. I think Barry's on here too. I've got his book. Very good. Of course, David Marler's book is just incredible.
Well, it has to be said that most of the books written by MUFON folks do tend to be very well written and very enlightening.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a point for anyone who's just getting into the subject or considering becoming a MUFON investigator is read some of the books that have been put out by MUFON investigators, and it'll give you a good idea as to what kind of folks we have.
I will agree with that.
Speaking of books, Mr. Assistant State Director,
Yes, sir.
I've got
Oh, yeah.
I've got 6 cartons of books that I'm going to be delivering to you in July.
I'm looking forward to it. What I want to do is I want to come up with a summary of all those cartons of books of places in the U.S. Of high strangeness, because one of the problems I have, I travel around a lot now, and simple question: where are the ley lines? Yeah, try to find a definitive answer on that.
Good luck.
Yeah, so anyway, I want to come up with a synopsis of places of interest in the U.S.
Well, I think Rich and Deb got the complete set of there's 2 different sets of books on high strangeness, and it goes state by state.
Yep.
So when you get to a point where you want to start trading books amongst you folks,
Yep.
Deb and Rich have got 2 complete different collections of books, but they've got 2 of them in the books that I delivered to them here a couple of months ago. So,
Okay. Well, I think our 5 minutes is just about up. So
yep.
Let's get back into it. And I don't want to put any pressure on you, Doug, but tonight is it's a hard 4:15 type situation.
Oh, see how you are. Okay, well, that means I'm going to have to get my jaws flapping a little quicker.
Okay.
I think we'll be doing okay. I'll watch my clock here. So, all right, if everybody's back and we're ready to resume, and I'm assuming that the slideshow was still up, Jeff, is that correct? All right, great. Then we're just going to go ahead and pick up where we left off. Kenneth Arnold, Captain Emil Smith, and Dave Johnson were each asked to send a detailed description of what they had seen to the commanding officer of Wright-Patterson Field, Dayton, Ohio, and were subsequently interviewed on July 12th through 14th by 2 representatives of A2 military intelligence of the 4th Air Force, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown. Now, those are the 2 gentlemen whose images are currently on the screen. The Air Force Project Sign would not be established until 1948, but it's obvious that these 2 military intelligence officers, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, were among the first to be assigned to investigate the UFO phenomenon for the military. It's interesting to note that these 2 gentlemen would be the first to perish, not so much in the pursuit of a UFO, but in trying to get information on UFOs for the government. It doesn't really come into this story, but there are 2 gentlemen who definitely gave everything to their investigation of UFOs. Kenneth Arnold had received stacks of mail from all over the country, as well as other parts of the world. With Arnold's blessing, Davidson and Brown went through all of this mail and took possession of several items. The mail they selected were taken mostly the nature of societies or organizations that had written Arnold, asking for full accounts of his original experience. At the end of this interview, Brown and Davidson firmly expressed to Arnold that if anything of an unusual nature came to his attention, Arnold was to phone them, collect, or write to them in care of A2, 4th Air Force, Hamilton Field, California, and that it would probably be better for all concerned if Arnold refused to discuss his experiences any further. Well, based on this and the military's attitudes expressed in the newspapers, an argument could be made that the military, if not the government, had already begun phasing in a cover-up. Now, I've got to say, in my research for these different programs that I give that have Arnold in them, Arnold would later say that he had already begun to cut back on his speaking about what he had seen. He felt like it was getting more press than he really felt comfortable trying to give it. So it's interesting that even though they requested him not to continue speaking about it, he had already come to the conclusion that he was not going to speak about it. And he'd been offered on more than one occasion some pretty good money to write his story exclusively, and he turned it down. Well, during the 10 days from July 20th through the 30th, 12 sightings were reported, or a little more than one per day. So it seems as though the flap was beginning to slow down somewhat. On July 29th at Hamilton Field, California at 2:50 p.m., Assistant Base Operations Officer Captain William H. Ryard and ex-Air B-29 pilot First Lieutenant Ward Stewart saw for an unknown length of time two round, shiny, white objects, which estimated 15 to 25 foot diameters. They flew 3 to 4 times the apparent speed of a P-80, which was also in sight at the time, at 6,000 to 10,000 feet altitude, heading southeast at 120 degrees. One object flew straight and level, the other weaved from side to side like an escort fighter. These two gentlemen also were investigated, by the way, by Davidson and Brown. So it wasn't just civilians that they had been tasked with getting information from. In just 60 days, there had been 853 sightings. June and July 1947 was the largest wave or flap in U.S. history. With 60 days of continuous sightings, this truly was the coming of the saucers. I hope I'm not going to have another glitch here. My cursor froze about 3 times there while I was trying to make that advance on the screen. With only 18 reported sightings, August was less dramatic than the previous 2 months. The second full week of August had 5 consecutive days of sightings, but only 2 of those days had multiple sightings, with 3 sightings each day. 3 other days in August had 2 sightings each day. On August 6th, Myrtle Creek, Oregon, at approximately 6:15 p.m., a pilot was instructing a student in a takeoff. Just as the student was about to take off, the pilot noticed an object in the sky about 5,000 to 8,000 feet in the air. The sky was known to be completely clear, and visibility for the pilot was excellent. He stated that the object glistened and appeared to be of an aluminum sheeting. As he noticed that the strange object, he immediately took over the controls. As soon as he noticed the object, he immediately took over the controls from the student, and they were at about 400 feet altitude. He proceeded east in an attempt to continue to observe the object. The pilot advised the tower that the object was climbing and traveling east at a high speed, which he estimated as being at least 1,000 miles per hour. He believed the object to be of a spherical shape and recalled a darker object to the right of it when he first saw it. There was no vapor trail or noise observed from the object. After around 10 minutes of observing, the pilot made another landing and takeoff, and in practically the same position at 400 feet, both the pilot and the student observed the anomaly just as they had seen it before. The pilot estimated the sphere to be about 30 feet in diameter and stated that the first time they saw the object, it was so close they could fly right into it. These sightings were verified by the student, but the student estimated the sphere to be somewhat smaller at 50 feet in diameter. The wave of the summer of 1947 was over, but it was certainly not going to be forgotten. The military was downplaying the saucers in the press. They certainly were taking them seriously at Wright-Patterson, however, and UFOs were definitely being studied. In his book, Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, Captain Edward Ruppelt stated, by the end of July 1947, the UFO security lid was down tight. The few members of the press who did inquire about what the Air Force was doing got the same treatment that they would get today if you inquired about the number of thermonuclear weapons stockpiled in the US. At ATIC, there was confusion almost to the point of panic. Now, that's a quote from Ruppelt's book. So the whole idea of the atomic stockpile would have made a lot more sense at the time of his writing. And there's Captain Ruppelt. At the Pentagon, things were strangely quiet. During the 1946 Ghost Rocket reports in Sweden and Northern Europe, Lieutenant Colonel George D. Garrett, General Shulgren, and FBI liaison officer to the Army Air Force, Wesley Reynolds, had been driven into an investigative furor by the higher powers at the Pentagon. But in regards to the massive UFO sightings here in the US in 1947, these same officials were strangely quiet. This led Lieutenant Colonel Garrett and many at the FBI to suspect that the Pentagon already knew what the UFOs were and where they were from. On September 23rd, 1947, General Nathan F. Twining, Commanding General of Air Materiel Command at Wright Field, Ohio, sent a letter to Brigadier General George Shulgren, Commanding General of the Army Air Forces. That letter read in part, "It is the opinion of this command that the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious, that there are objects probably approximating the shape of a disk and of which appreciable size as to appear to be as large as man-made aircraft. The reported operating characteristics, such as extreme rate of climb, maneuverability, particularly when in roll, and action, which must be considered evasive when sighted or contacted by friendly aircraft and radar, lend belief to the possibility that some of the objects are controlled either manually, automatically, or remotely." I believe I missed a slide there. There's Nathan Twining. The apparent common description of the objects is as follows: a metallic or light reflective surface, the absence of a trail except in a few instances when the object apparently was operating under high performance conditions. They're circular or elliptical in shape, flat on bottom, and domed on top. Several reports of well-kept formation flights varying from 3 to 9 objects have been reported. Normally, there is no associated sound except in 3 instances when a substantial rumbling roar was noted. The level flight speeds reported are normally estimated to be above 300 knots. General Twining concluded, "It is recommended that headquarters, Army Air Forces, issue a directive assigning a priority, security classification, and code name for detailed study of this matter, to include the preparation of complete sets of all available and pertinent data, which will then be made available to the Army, Navy, Atomic Energy Commission, Joint Research and Development Board, Air Force Scientific Advisory Group, and the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, as well as the RAND and NEPA projects for comment and recommendations, with a preliminary report to be forwarded within 15 days of receipt of the data and a detailed report thereafter every 30 days as this letter that the formation of Project Sign was instituted." There we are. Sign was active for just under 1 year, and more than half of the cases it examined were from June and July of 1947. The original conclusion that SIGN reached was that the flying saucers were most likely extraterrestrial in origin. And that is the end of this presentation. I hope it has at least been enlightening for all of the herky-jerkiness that we seem to have gotten, and then the one blip. But I'm kind of happy that we only had one glip. I figured there might be a little more than that. I didn't mention to you before, Jeff, but I was trying out a new hotspot, and but I checked it. That was not the glitch.
Okay, well, it went very well. I remember some of the early Zoom meetings, and they didn't go as well as this. So you did good there, Doug.
Well, great.
Are there any questions for Doug?
Yeah, I have a question, if I may. I live here in San Rafael, really close to Hamilton Air Force Base. And my question is what does he think about the Maui Island case? It was right around Kenneth Arnold's time. I understand Kenneth Arnold and even Gray Barker went to investigate. The witness, they were out on a boat, this donut-shaped object. There were 6 of them. One of them discharged metal. It seemed to be in trouble. Killed the kid's dog on the boat, put damage on the boat. Supposedly, I read a couple conflicting stories about how the witness recanted, but later on it turned out that he had visits from the men in black, so he was intimidated into recanting his story. But it's really hard to find information on this, and I was just wondering if he had information, since that was kind of the era that he's, investigating.
Well, it just so happens that the Murray Island incident is one of my favorite topics of research. I have collected reams of information on it. It is, in my opinion, easily one of the top 3 for interesting situations. The initial report the sighting itself was very brief, and that's very common with UFO sightings. If you have a sighting that lasts more than a minute or two, you've had a really big sighting. It wasn't the sighting itself that fascinates me as much as everything that happened afterwards. And I mentioned that Captain Davidson and Lieutenant Brown were the first 2 military men to die in the line of duty,
right,
related to UFOs. They both died because of the Murray Island incident, or more properly, they died while investigating the Murray Island incident. So that incident has everything from some of the first visits of men in black to airmen dying in the pursuit of the truth. It had Kenneth Arnold was one of the people I mentioned that he had turned down a good deal of money to write his own story. But it so happens that the one time he did accept money to have anything to do with a UFO case, it was the Murray Island case. He was contacted and offered a paycheck, essentially, and expenses to go and investigate that case. He did, and interestingly enough, Captain E.J. Smith, who was featured in today's presentation, went with Kenneth Arnold, and the 2 of them investigated that case together. They were later joined by other military personnel besides Brown and the other gentleman. I'm having a senior moment here, but the military was very involved. And you mentioned the fact that the witnesses later were said to recant. Well, that's not exactly true. Under very abusive conditions from the FBI, they began to essentially say things like, well, whatever you want me to say, tell me what you want me to say. And at one point, one of the FBI agents, a gentleman who features hugely in UFO lore, Guy Barker, I think was his name, he actually said, well, I need you to say that you made it all up. And one of the 2 witnesses, actually there's only one witness to the sighting who spoke. And that gentleman said, okay, it never happened, I made it up. But afterwards, when they were no longer being heavily put upon by these guys, they both came back and said, no, we said that because we're being very much physically harassed in an office with armed FBI agents. They were going to say whatever they needed to say. But there are so many things about that event, that case, that really goes through the next 10 to 15 years of U.S. history, that it's just amazing. So that's a great case, and it's something that I've thought about maybe doing a presentation on at some point, but it would be a really long presentation.
Oh, thank you so much. I really, wondered, because I've been trying to find information on it, and it's very sparse, but it is a very intriguing case.
It certainly is. I'm glad you enjoy it too.
Thank you.
Doug, this is Jim Wolford in Indianapolis. I got a question.
Hey, Jim.
Has anyone figured out what entity types or groups are represented by these early arrivals of flying discs and similar craft?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think it's ever been determined much of anything. And to me, again, and I'm a little bit different, I guess, than a lot of folks who are interested in UFOs. To me, some of the more interesting aspects of the 1947 flap aren't the sightings themselves as much as how the government and our society grew to see and react to UFO sightings. And by the way, Jim, before I forget to say it, thank you for everything you're doing for us up there in Indiana. I certainly appreciate your assistance there.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for answering the question.
Anybody else with a question?
Yeah, Doug, I have a question. This is James.
Hi, James.
Yeah, why were there a lot of sightings in the Pacific Northwest? Did that have to do anything with the aerospace industry, like post World War II, like Boeing, let's say, or what was your intake on that?
Well, certainly we don't know why they were so prevalent up there, but we do know that they were. And an educated guess, and based upon a lot of the research I have done, would suggest that yes, it's probably because we did have very sensitive installations up there. Now, other folks have pointed out, and I can't disagree, having no real information to either confirm or deny it, but other folks have made the suggestion that one of the reasons the Northwest area of the US was so heavily inundated was because of the fact that a lot of sightings seemed to originate from the northern or the top of the world, really, at that time. There were so many sightings in the frozen areas, both North Pole and South Pole, but the only thing that kind of disagrees with that is the fact that Canada, although they certainly have had their fair share of sightings, Canada did not experience anywhere near the number of sightings that the US got in 47. So I would have to think that maybe it's got more to do with sensitive installations.
Thank you, Doug.
Doug, it's Barry. I would agree with you there. Matter of fact, my comment was going to be with the Hanford site being the first nuclear plant to go online in September of 44. You wonder if, in fact, 6 months later, you have this, numerous UFO reports in 47 throughout the United States, but skewed a little bit heavier in that Northwest area, having to do with the sensitivity of the fact we've got a nuclear plant up there. And then you also have, you look in New Mexico and the sense of installations in New Mexico with a high number of UFOs sighted over there. Interesting correlations between those areas, to your point. Sensitivity towards nuclear or storage sites or technology being developed in those particular areas. I also wanted to comment that nice job. I mean, not a lot of people talk about 47, but when you think about where the hundreds of reports for the original estimate of the situation was coming from, there was hundreds of domestic reports that were occurring before, Kenneth Arnold and Roswell. And shortly thereafter, including international sightings too. You know, at least 30 that were part of that estimate of the situation report too.
Absolutely. And just as a point of interest, when I was doing research on Maury Island, there have actually been suggestions, very well-made suggestions from important people who should be, we would hope at the time, in the know, who at the time, they were suggesting, or actually they were speaking a concern. They had mentioned to the Air Force, the Army Air Force at the time, that they were concerned that possibly what had been seen in the Maury Island sighting was actually a flight carrying, at that time, of course, unknown to the public, nuclear waste that had been damaged. And they were afraid that that could have been one of their overflights trying to move nuclear waste from Hanford down the coast to get rid of it. Fortunately, it was later shown that that was not the case, but it was interesting that early on, the folks in the Army Air Force and at Hanford were concerned that, we've just had our first nuclear incident, but that appears not to be the case. Although I'm still looking into that because it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, if they were dropping off some nuclear waste, they were certainly doing it in some interestingly described aircraft.
Exactly. Exactly.
So appreciate your research and presentation.
Thank you.
Nice job to see the early reports coming out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else with a question or a comment?
Doug, I have a question. Since you said you have done, how many did you say, 400 of 800 investigations or so? I was wondering if in any of the cases that you have personally investigated, you have come in contact with somebody that at some point or another became involved with the so-called Men in Black.
Well, yes. I have spoken to folks during investigations. Now, I have to say that it's not that I don't believe in the Man in Black phenomenon. I certainly do. But I think that whole aspect of ufology has kind of taken on a life of its own. It's really grown to become, in some people's minds, an area of specialty. You know, it's like some people are into abductions, some are into cattle mutilations. There are folks who are very much into the whole Man in Black phenomenon. It's been my experience that the more outlandish statements of the Men in Black situation, if you will, whenever I really get to looking at them, they tend to be not very well thought out. And so I think that those are generally just false accusations. It's something that adds a heightened sense of urgency to one's UFO story if they throw that in. But at the same time, I personally do believe that the government was using agents to go around and intimidate people. I do believe that in the Maury Island case, that certainly happened. But I also have a suspicion that some of the other key players in Maury Island, and I'm not really going to go into who they were, but some of the key characters in the Maury Island situation may have been even a deeper, I'll say, spy for the government than the Men in Black who were involved. But if you're asking if I have ever had an encounter with anyone that could be classified as Men in Black, I have not. And I have not yet investigated a case. Well, I take that back. There's been one case that I think was highly, highly credible, in which the witness described what could only be stated to have been two Men in Black who visited their business. So for what that's worth.
Well, thank you very much. I think there was I don't remember if it was in Montana, the case of a family that had a farm and they had a UFO that landed in their backyard, and then at some point there were, and this is like I'm not good with numbers and keeping this minutia of data in my mind, but it seemed to be a more recent case. So I was wondering if anyone in MUFON had, you probably being one of the people that has investigated most cases. I was curious, but thank you. I appreciate. Also, thank you for the presentation. Lots of information, lots of it. I probably have to watch the recordings to kind of catch up on details.
Well, thank you. And I'm gonna look into that because that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I don't remember. It's I believe it was either in Montana or possibly even, don't know if it was Colorado or Montana, but it was a big farm with this family, and I think it's one of the cases that was featured on Hangar 1, actually.
Are you referring to Delphos, Kansas?
I'm in Colorado.
Oh, are you referring to a landing at a farm case as the Delphos, Kansas trace evidence incident?
Oh,
doesn't
maybe. You know what? I don't know. I know that there was this this UFO that actually literally landed on their farm. So, but I don't remember the state. I am sorry. I will let you know. I will actually I'm going to look it up because I think I saved the video. Besides this being also featured, like I said, on Hangar 1, but it's one of the cases that really stayed with me. I remember the story, yeah.
Well, Olivia, if you find that information and you want to send it to me, I will take a look at it and I will let you know what I can find for you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I would love to. Yeah.
Anybody else with a question?
I guess I could ask the question again if you don't mind, but
That's okay. Absolutely.
Okay, good. Talking about the Men in Black, I'm an older person and I was so much into ufology when I was a kid. And then I bought a collection of books and I got Gray Barker's book. What was it? They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. And he basically did the Flatwoods Monster. And then he was talking about the Men in Black. And he was also talking about the New Zealand and Australian research groups, the UFO research groups, and how they were intimidated into discontinuing their investigations. And the other gentleman, Albert K. Bender, who had an investigation group up in, I guess, Connecticut, and his encounters with the Men in Black. And then in my pile of books, I found a book by Albert K. Bender, The Men in Black. And it was published 4 years later. And he talked about his experience with the Men in Black. And I read the book and I just totally forgot because in his book, he basically says they were aliens. And he wrote a bunch of things in there that nowadays we sort of accepted in the ufology community as kind of normal, like USOs, angel hair, just a whole bunch of things. And, he was taken on board. He couldn't speak about it, but it just was so creepy. And I just freaked out. But did you ever read that book by Albert K. Bender and what his take was on the Men in Black?
I have read Albert Bender's book. And just, I don't like to, I don't like to give negative information or opinions, but in my opinion, I think Mr. Bender was rather sensationalizing an awful lot of what he wrote. And the reason I say that is because some of the other reports and cases that Albert Bender was known to report on were actually cases that have been shown to have occurred to other people, minus a lot of the more bizarre things. However, the first book you mentioned, They Knew Too Much, that book does have a lot of what I think were probably very credible Men in Black stories. And I think most of those were probably government agents. And I think that the author came to the same conclusion.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, Doug, when you get a chance, can you make me host again?
And I do that how? Do I pin you?
No, you click on my name and you make me the host. Under more, highlight my name and then go to more.
I don't seem to have more. I have mute, stop, chat, rename, up, make host. There it
There
is.
you go.
There you are, sir.
Great, thank you. And are there more questions for Doug?
No? Well, thank you, folks. I appreciate you coming and listening to my presentation. I hope it wasn't too disjointed. As I was going through it, I did realize that some of the alterations I'd made in my notes were not as smooth as they should have been. I apologize for that. I will just have to say, well, gosh, I'm getting old. But I hope it got the information across, and I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you for having me. Come on, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thoroughly enjoyed it, Doug. Enjoy it every time you give a presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, well, are there any questions for the Colorado MUFON chapter? As ASD, I will try to answer those.
Jeff, did
Yeah,
you mention about the picnic coming up in July?
Ooh,
No,
yeah.
I did not know.
You didn't know we were having a picnic, or you?
I don't know the details of it.
Oh, okay.
Are those
don't say
details
too
going to be
bad.
on the Co-MUFON website?
Yes. I don't have the name of the park in front of me right now, but I'm sure it'll have a map and information. It'll be the second Saturday of July.
Okay.
The time frame will probably start about noon, and it'll be the first real live gathering of everybody.
Are
at
we
a setting.
going to try to hybrid that too?
Are we trying to?
Yes.
Sorry?
Yes, we are.
And it's Bellevue Park.
Bellevue Park. That's it. Okay.
Bellevue Park. Uh-huh.
Well, there you go. And more details will be put up on the Co-MUFON website, that nonprofit website that needs donations.
Or you could become a member.
Or you could become a member and help that nonprofit organization.
It's only $25 a year.
A year, a whole
Yeah.
year.
We're like 35 for a family. So
Yeah.
I'm going to up the ante. You can join and become a field investigator. We always need more field investigators.
Yes, unfortunately we just lost a couple, and I think up until a few days ago, most investigators had 2, if not 3 cases.
Just to clarify, it wasn't due to handling cases.
No,
No. It had nothing to do with handling cases.
I'm proud to say Colorado has not lost a single investigator in the line of duty since I've been part of Colorado MUFON.
Yeah.
Well, that's very good to hear because I joined.
You're not a danger. We won't put you at risk, Olivia. You're fine.
I'm still waiting for the manual to arrive, but that's taking some time.
Yeah. My wife is involved in a company that has to ship a lot of product around, and shipping times are just incredible right now.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's probably gonna be a pretty thick book, so it's probably taking maybe longer because it's I don't know. I haven't seen it. I'm guessing.
Anyone have any questions about MUFON?
Yeah, not only do you have 2 principals for MUFON here, you have John Schuessler here, who is one of the founding members.
Ooh. Hello.
Colorado MUFON is a banner unit. You know, we've got great talent here. We've got a great state to investigate in. And Doug suggesting you sign up and become an investigator, I can tell you from one experience, investigations was the most interesting things I have done in this field. You meet the real people with the real problems, the real issues. And when you get done, you can't help but say, oh, UFOs are real. I don't care what the government says.
And there's a number of times that people have experiences and they need to talk to somebody about it, somebody that's not going to judge them. And as a field investigator, we provide that ear to listen to them.
And in some ways, that's one of the most satisfying parts of the job, in my opinion, is being able to talk to these folks, the ones who you can resolve the situation for them when you can identify what they saw, and they're so grateful that you came and did the investigation. And then those who, when we can't give them a firm explanation, and we have to admit it's an unknown, it also gives them some sense of security, just knowing there's people like us out there who will listen and who will give their situation an honest investigation. It's so satisfying, truly is.
Some people don't understand the process, and when we get back to them, we say, okay, we're gonna give this a disposition of unknown aerial vehicle, and they feel kind of let down. I just try to remind them that, you know, that whole Phoenix Light thing, yeah, that's the same category that your sighting is in, so it's a big deal.
Gentlemen, can you hear me? This is Debbie from Durango.
Yes.
I'm curious about Katie's books. You mentioned that she had 2 of them. Could you give me those titles?
Well, so far only one has been published. She's working on the second. And I think the first one is called Letters of Love and Light.
Yep. It's about Leo Sprinkle and his investigations. And this is pre-internet. So it was letters.
Fascinating. I can't wait to meet her in person. I really want to talk to her. I'm looking forward to that meeting in July. I want to make it up there.
You'll definitely enjoy Katie. I got to ask, Shelley, what are you trying to show us? That's a great painting. Is that a painting you did? You're muted, by the way, Shelley. So if you're answering, I can't hear you.
Yeah, that's a painting I did of one of the cases.
I love it. I love it. You know,
Very talented. Good job. Looks like a picture.
It
Thank
does.
you.
Have you been to the Co-MUFON website or YouTube channel? One of our guest speakers, his illustrations are on there, and I see a striking resemblance. It's very good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I painted this for Deb. She just made a book.
That's great. It's a very good picture.
One of our investigators just closed the TR3B case.
And this is for Olivia. This is what the manual looks like that's going to arrive at her house. So it's about book size, not very thick.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, that's good that you, because actually I was told that it used to be a lot simpler to pass the test and has become, I guess, much more detailed. And so I'm not sure what to expect yet. So thank you for showing me that.
If I can pass the test, anybody can pass the test.
Well, that's what somebody else has said, actually. But, you know, he passed the test, I think it was in 2005 or something like that.
Well, the nice thing about the exam is, you know, some people might think it's a little harder than it used to be. It's certainly easier to follow than it used to be. Back when I took the test on paper, it was very confusing. And a lot of the questions seem to be the same question, urging a different answer. I don't know if they're just trying to get rid of me early on, which might have been a smart thing, but the test is now much less confusing, and being online, it's very easy to take.
Oh,
Yeah, let me jump in here. And of course, Doug's being facetious. No one ever wants to get rid of Doug. That's for sure. So Olivia, the process used to be a piece of paper. You take the book, and in the back of the book, you had the test, and you take the test. Now, the issue with that is the first person to take the test and get a decent grade could just pass that around, and there you go.
oh,
So,
okay.
well, you're not really, the whole purpose of the examination is not to see what you can remember. It's to help identify the important parts of the manual that we think that should be in the forefront of what you're learning. So we decided a few years back that we would put it online. We established MUFON University, which you'll learn about if you haven't already. MUFON University, for the purpose of being able to have a fairer test, if you will. There's about 400, a little over 400 questions in a question pool, and when you register for the test, it's going to randomly pull out 100 questions and make up your test. So no two tests are ever the same. But now here's the good news for you. Because we're interested in learning and not memorization, the test is open book.
Oh, I see.
We're interested in the fact that you're looking at a question, you don't understand it, maybe it just draws a complete blank. Rather than have you guess, we'd rather have you go through the manual and see if you could figure it out.
Oh, I see.
That's why we make it open book. So people say, well, it's harder online. Well, the reason that they think it's harder is because we actually ask them to go find the correct answer
in the book,
as opposed to just guessing. So that's the whole thing there.
Well,
Pass the test.
Well, I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to really get some of this, get a firsthand perspective on this information. There is so much, it's kind of hard to figure out from what you see online, what it's a legitimate story and what it's not. And a lot of them don't even really, I don't know, they sound very sketchy. But then I do believe that the UFOs are real because I've seen them myself. It was only one time in Missouri many years ago, but so that's not a question for me. The question is to, which is not really a question, but it's just the looking forward to getting some information firsthand and just the whole process and getting involved with people who have actually, like you guys, have been doing this for a long time and have the experience and things that I can learn from.
Yeah, and once you pass the examination, it entitles you to be a trainee. That is an official designation. You'll be partnered with an experienced investigator who will mentor you right up to the point where they feel you're qualified enough to actually talk to witnesses on your own. So it isn't like, you pass the test and we say congratulations and you're off and running. You actually get to experience the whole process with someone that has been doing it for a long time. So
that's good.
It's a fascinating involvement that, anyone who's an FI on this call or anywhere else in the world will tell you that it's a very rewarding experience. And some of the things that you'll learn from not only with your investigative partner, but also talking to witnesses will last a lifetime. Because the more people you talk to, the wider the scope of your knowledge. And after a while, you find yourself mentoring another trainee that might be coming into the group. So it's very rewarding, and I think you'll really enjoy it.
I have no doubt. How many ballpark field investigators do we have here in Colorado?
Yeah.
How many? approximately?
Well, I'd have to look. We have about a dozen investigators. Some are not taking cases currently. So
Oh,
I think right now, really active, 6, 7.
Oh, okay. And how many cases do we get? Maybe 10 cases a month or so? Or
10 to
something like that?
15 cases a month, depending on cloud cover. So
Okay.
Yeah, Rich,
Okay.
you should know the number, right? You'll have to unmute yourself.
I don't know the current number.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, it was
Sorry.
just kind of seeing. Yeah, well, I am looking forward to it. So, Doug, if I want to, because I think I know how I can retrieve the case that I was telling you about. Should I send it to Katie? I don't have your email address, but I have Katie's, and maybe Katie can send it to you, or how do we go about that?
I can give you my email address if you've got something to write with.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, what is it?
DOI@MUFON.com.
Oh, okay.
DOI, Director of Investigation @MUFON.com.
All right, thank you.
Kind of,
I don't think I needed the pen.
Oh, I would have. And real quick, if nobody's got anything more pressing, Rich, can Deb hear me?
Yes.
Deb can hear me? Oh, I see her way. Okay. I have to tell you guys that at lunch today, Terry was talking about our trip that we all made out to Nevada. And she had to bring it up, Rich. She says, I still get the biggest chuckle out of seeing you and Rich laying underneath that truck with a flat tire, trying to figure out how to get the tire down, and having Deb. So, folks, we were all out in the Nevada desert and we had a flat tire. Rich and I are laying on our backs in the dirt underneath of my pickup truck, trying to figure out how to get the spare tire down. And we'd been pounding and beating on this thing and yanking. We'd take a tire tool to pry this truck tire out. And then walking up, and she says, boys, come out from under there. And we slide out, and she goes, where's that long pole? And I had it in my hand. She goes, stick it in this hole and turn the crank, and the tire will come down. So the joke in my house is, how many guy MUFON field investigators does it take to change a flat tire? The answer is they can't do it. You have to have one female investigator who knows what she's doing.
Yeah. Well, one thing you're kind of leaving out there, Doug, is approximately where you were and how many flat tires you had.
Well, we were very close to Area 51, and on that trip, we ended up with 3, and they were all very suspicious flat tires.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for you folks at home that would like to experience excitement and intrigue, join MUFON.
Learn to change a tire.
Learn to change a tire before
It's in
you
the
go to
manual.
the desert. It should be. Now, we'd have definitely been in big trouble without Deb that day, because she saved our bacon. We were in a highly sensitive area for more than one reasons, sensitive, and she's the one that got us out of there, because we could not figure out how to get that doggone tire down for nothing. But it was just the way she did it. Boys, come out from under there. Now, where's that pole? Stick it in here and turn it like a crank. And we're both just amazed. It was like some new science to the two of us watching that tire slowly descend.
That was the same trip where Rich took his 10-mile hike, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
That's where he got his nickname Iron Man. Because he took a 10-mile hike in the desert. But I've got to say, and I hope this isn't giving out too much information, Rich, I've got to say, of all the people I have known and investigated this phenomenon with, Rich is the only guy I know that can be stranded out in the middle of the Nevada desert and get picked up by 2 showgirls from Vegas. I could never get that lucky. But Iron Man was able to do it.
Okay, and with that, do we have any more questions? Well, I think I'm going to call it then. Doug, thank you very much, and everybody, thank you for joining us here. At the peak, we were at 54 participants. Last time I checked, we were still in the mid 30s. So thank you everybody for showing up. And if you have any questions about our next meeting, about anything about the Colorado MUFON chapter, go to comufon.org and visit the CoMUFON YouTube channel. Another shameless plug. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff.
Bye.
Bye.